So I have the grapes all washed, and I'm going to cut them up and put them in. Usually we just cut these guys in half. Let me demonstrate how I cut the apricots. I usually cut them into quarters because every single apricot has a seam, and because the seam is created when you remove the pit or the stone from the fruit. And so when you cook it, there's a tendency for the apricot to split open, and then you get a giant piece of apricot like that, right there. If you cut it in half, it can still unfold, and you can have a larger than expected unfolded piece. And so, like, it could unfold up to that big. And so if you cut it one more time into quarters, even if it unfolds, you won't end up with such a large piece, just like that. So, can you see that? That's my demonstration of why I cut apricots into quarters before putting them into this dish. Also, because it's dried out, it has a tendency to absorb moisture, and so it's going to look larger once it's all cooked. But grapes, they're going to lose a little bit of moisture when they're cooked, so they might actually shrink up a little bit. If you put raisins in, sometimes they expand or they swell up as they absorb moisture, and they actually can look like fresh grapes before the whole dish is cooked through. I was just thinking, I do have one untraditional ingredient that I can add, and by adding that untraditional ingredient, I can maintain the tradition of this dish, of always changing a little bit, always adjusting or adding or manipulating or trying to still experiment with the best ingredients to find the optimal arrangement of this dish. So I have some golden berries. Those might be the perfect thing to add to this, and if I put them in, then I won't be eating them all the time. They are in the Solanaceae family. Their close relative is tomatoes, but they're quite sweet and tart. And one of the things that is going to be great for this dish is that they're sort of a yellowish brown, which will complement all the other colors in here. The only other thing that we have in there that's remotely the same color would be the apricots. And if they end up not being a great ingredient for this dish, I just won't use them next year. I think it'll be a good way to carry on the tradition of constantly tinkering with this recipe, and so it'll be a genuine addition of Dad's Thanksgiving stuffing. So usually you add the bread last or close to last because sometimes the bread can be a little bit weak. If it's soggy, if you're using store-bought bread, as it absorbs the moisture, it can sort of fall apart or turn into sort of dissolve away, and so it ends up more like a bread pudding if you're not careful, especially if you're not careful when you're stirring it. Now, sourdough has a little bit of texture, a little bit of crumbs, so that won't necessarily happen with the sourdough, but because these are such small pieces, I'm a little worried that it's going to happen. So you always add the bread last, and you always are a little bit careful when you're stirring it. You try not to break up the bread into even more pieces as you do so. And then you try to get that bread nice and dried out so that it soaks up all the moisture that's created from the fruit and from the addition of the turkey stock. And the white wine, we want it to soak up the white wine as well. So I have all the grapes in here. These are about all the grapes I'm going to add. I have the onions, the celery, the cilantro, the sausage, and just about all the fruits in there, so it's just about time to add the bread. I do have quite a bit here. I might have to end up splitting this into 2 bowls in order to have enough room to mix it all in, and hopefully I bought enough bread for all the non-bread ingredients. I might end up using all of those all of the 2 loaves that I bought of this sourdough. I'm going to pull out the golden berries now. Here they are. It'll be nice to add these, so I stopped snacking on them. There they are. They're about the size of a raisin, maybe a little bit bigger. And I'm just going to throw them in whole. It'll be interesting to see what they look like when they're cooked up. Here we go. Just adding about a handful. There they go. Maybe a handful and a half. There we go. Now I'm going to do another stir, get that distributed throughout, and take a good look at it. I don't think I have the nuts in here yet, so I'm going to have to add those still. I'm going to add the pine nuts and some walnuts. Anything else I should put in there? Well, I think you're going to have to speak up, because I'm not hearing anything. Oh, you said it's perfect. All right. We'll go with that. It looks perfect to me, too. I could add some more apricots, but I'm a big fan of apricots, so I think I could always add more apricots to this. I think it's time to add the nuts. I have some pine nuts here. I'm going to add the walnuts as well. Pine nuts are definitely not something that was in the original recipe, but it's something we've added over the years. But ever since we've added them, they've been a part of it ever since. Pine nuts come from certain species of pine trees that produce these nuts. They produce edible pine nuts. The trees themselves, as I understand it, do not produce seeds or edible seeds every single year. They have like years where they're producing in excess and years where they might not be producing very much at all. So if you were living in the region, like pine nuts were used historically or prehistorically by Native Americans, if you're living in that region, I can imagine it'd be difficult to figure out which pine nuts are producing large amounts of seeds and when. But they must have been able to do so. Because I have a lot of stuffing here, I'm adding quite a few pine nuts as well. My technique here is more of a stir and fold. I'm trying not to mash up the fruit that's in there already or break apart the sausage any more than it already is. And now I'm going to add the walnuts. When you're eating pine nuts, there's something in there that is slightly toxic, so it's possible to eat too many pine nuts and get sick. I had a professor when I was working on my master's thesis who would just love pine nuts. He'd eat pine nuts to the point of sickness, or at least that's the story he told me. I've never eaten so many pine nuts that I got sick. Like I was saying before, in the past, prehistoric times, pine nuts were believed to be a major component of some Native American diets. But it is difficult to gauge how much they relied upon them, like what they would do in years where they weren't available or they weren't present. Would they move somewhere else, or would they just find another resource? How would they know to be in the right place at the right time to get the most pine nuts? Because you're going to have some groups of trees that are producing in abundance one year and then the next year not be producing very much, and you got a whole other group of trees somewhere else that'll be producing in abundance that year. So this is one of those archaeological questions that we ourselves are still trying to figure out, and I think someday somebody far smarter than me will be able to figure it out, find a way to look at that. Looks like the breadcrumbs are just about ready. They seem pretty dry, ready to soak up all that moisture. Okay, we're back. I've got all of the sourdough bread toasted up, nice and dried out. I'm going to try to combine the two dishes together and then get them into possibly this dish for baking. Let's see what we can do here. What happened to, here we go. So I'm going to add as much of this as I can. I might have made too much of the stuffing, which is something that happens. I might need to get some more bread to finish this all off at another date. We'll add this now, get it nice and mixed together. when I was a kid, we would always use the same bowl to mix this in. And it was the largest bowl we owned in the house. And it was decorated with strawberries. It had strawberry plants on it. And the reason why we used that bowl, it was a big plastic bowl. The main reason we used that bowl was because it was the biggest bowl in the house. And it could accommodate everything we needed to add to the dish. As you can see, this bowl I'm using it today because it's the largest bowl I have, and it's not sufficiently large enough for me to finish this dish. I had to split it up into another bowl, the second largest bowl I have. Well, a couple years back, under mysterious circumstances, my mother informed me that strawberry bowl we used every single year to make stuffing was broken by none other than my sister. And she said it fell off the shelf, and I say it happened under mysterious circumstances because that bowl was plastic. How could that bowl break? It should have bounced and had no problems, but I wasn't there to witness it, so I'm just gonna have to take their word for it. This might be just the perfect amount of fruit and meat and nuts for the amount of bread that I have, because it's looking like we're getting at a very close ratio of bread to non-bread stuffing filling. But yeah, we're getting some very full bowls here. I think this should be just about perfect. And then I'll add the liquids, and we should be finished with the recipe. Like I said, this is a recipe with a lot of ingredients, but once you get them all together, it's quite simple. You basically just bake this in the oven until it warms up and gets nice and crispy. You want the bread to start taking on color. You might even have to cover it with foil so it doesn't dry out. But you do want it to, you don't want there to be any standing liquid in the bottom of the dish once it's all cooked up. You want there to be some liquid in there before you start cooking up, but once it's all cooked up, you want it to absorb all that moisture. So this is nearly perfect, or as perfect as I can get it. And it looks like I had just enough meat or sausage and fruit and other ingredients and just enough bread that I've got a pretty good ratio of bread to non-bread fillings. And now I'm going to add the liquids. You really only need a splash of white wine. That's good. There's a lot of filling, so you need a little bit more. And then the rest of the liquid is going to come from that stock that I made earlier. And that stock was very simply just the leftover turkey carcass from the smoked turkey breasts that I made. And I took that carcass and I put it in my Instant Pot and I cooked it on the broth function and for about an hour, I think. And by the time that was all finished, it had pulled all the flavor and all the moisture out of the turkey carcass. And all that was left was a dried out carcass and a lot of flavorful liquid. And that became my turkey stock. And then I put it in a bottle that I had laying around, a plastic water bottle, and froze it until I needed it. So now I'm going to add some of that turkey stock. and we'll be finished. You need quite a bit more of this than you need of the white wine. But we're going to be careful not to add too much. I remember when we first started out and we were using store-bought bread, there was a tendency for it to really fall apart and get gloopy, like just dissolve and turn into this like solid mass, which is a lot of what people serve. I've seen a lot of traditional stuffing recipes where the stuffing turns into this like solid mass. But that really was never the objective of this dish. So ideally you would stir it just enough or add just enough liquid to get, so you still have some standing liquid in the bottom. But be careful enough so that you don't get soggy bread. And of course, this is a very forgiving recipe. If you don't add enough water, you can always add more water while it's baking. Also, all that fruit is going to lend some liquid to the dish as the fruit cooks. I've never had a Thanksgiving stuffing go wrong. Or if it has gone wrong, everybody's been nice enough not to tell me. This one's just about there. I'm going to let it sit for a little bit because it might soak up some of that moisture. And I'll stir this guy. See what his distribution of moisture is looking like. It would be great if I could eat this every single day, but really isn't something you should be eating every single day, or at least if you're going to eat it every single day, eat just enough that you can still maintain your personal health. Now that I've made all this, I have to find a container in which to store it. I bought this foil, collapsible foil, like a disposable foil container, which I think that I will use, but I might spray it first in order to ensure that it doesn't end up sticking. They both have some standing water, in the bottom, but I think they're going to need just a little bit more. Yeah, this is starting to really look perfect. I wish that I could show you the amount of liquid in there. Maybe I'll move the camera and get like an over-the-shoulder view so that you can see it, to help you understand the level of moisture that we're shooting for. I guess I would say you want maybe a half an inch of liquid at the bottom, quarter of an inch to a half an inch of standing liquid at the bottom. Let me grab that camera and bring it over. See if this helps illustrate what I'm talking about. Now, it's still going to be absorbing liquid. This is where it gets messy. I've got messy hands here. All right, let's see if that helps. See that liquid in there? Yeah. So if I keep it flat, I'm not sure if you can still see the liquid in there. Yeah, there's a little bit of liquid in there. Yeah. And that's what we're going for, because that liquid is going to bubble and boil and percolate up through the dish and allow everything to be nice and not dry once it all cooks up. So I got my metal dish here, which I'm going to try to spray, and then I will put as much of these 2 bowls in there as possible, and I'll reserve a little bit for me for sampling so that I can evaluate the flavor. Where is our cooking spray? Here we go. Apparently, we're on with cooking oil today, or coconut cooking oil. That's what we have here. Just spraying the edges and the bottom. That should do it. And then I'm going to fill it up with as much of this as I can. Is it possible that I breathed in some of that coconut cooking oil? It seems to have irritated my throat. Somebody call the paramedics. Yeah, this is looking good. Again, I'm trying to be delicate with the bread. We don't want to break it all down and turn it into a gloppy mess. But it does need to have a fair amount of liquid in there, so I might just add a little bit more. I know this is going to be frustrating for you because everything in here is based on what it should look like, based on like experience. I'm trying to explain it to you in as scientific and practical a way. But so much of what I learned doing this dish was by sight, by feel, by intuition. My father never measured anything. People have said of my father that he wasn't a very good cook, and that's not true at all. He was a pretty terrific cook. He just couldn't follow any directions. I remember he took a trip to China, and I think he either came back with a wok or he purchased a wok soon after he got back. He was so excited about cooking with woks, and we must have been like the only people in Napoleon, Ohio, the only white people anyway that had a wok. And he would try to cook all these dishes for us in the wok, and they were just terrible. They weren't all terrible, but I remember one time he was supposed to put in something like cornstarch, and he mistakenly put in baking soda, and it just was not the same. And we all wanted to go. It was a Friday night. We all wanted to go to a football game and get a hot dog at the football game and just enjoy ourselves. And my dad's like, I worked hard to make this dish for you, so you're going to sit down and eat it. And so we all sit down to eat before we go to the football game. And it just tastes horrible. Like, nobody likes it, but nobody's saying anything. And my brother, who is about 4 years younger than me and was too young at the time to know any better, goes, I don't like this. And it basically just like broke the tension enough that everybody could concur that whatever my father had constructed was inedible. And so somehow we got out of eating it. That's my story. All right, I'm gonna scoop off a portion for myself, stick that in the oven, bake it for a little bit so that I can try it and demonstrate its deliciousness to you. I have my pan full. This is going to be frozen until Thanksgiving. It'll freeze very well, I hope. And then I will serve it to my family on Thanksgiving. I have a little bit extra here that's not going to fit in rather this, I could dome this up a little bit more, I suppose. We might try to do that because the lid on this container has a lot of extra space, so maybe I'll try to do that. But this is what I'm going to bake in the oven to share with you. So I'm going to do that. I think we're going to start it covered with aluminum foil at 350. We'll try that for maybe 30 minutes. It's a small dish, so it shouldn't take too long. But after that, we might end up we'll probably take the foil off at some point to let it dry out and crisp up a little bit before we eat it. This again is one of those dishes where you just gotta kind of feel your way through it. Everything in here has been pre-cooked, so there really isn't any danger of sickness unless I've improperly stored anything, but I was trained in a microbiology lab, so I'm usually pretty good about cross-contamination and proper storage. Yeah, I think we should be okay with stacking this up nice and high and getting the lid on and freezing that. Just might be a little tricky. It smells wonderful. I started cooking this and I immediately said it smells like Thanksgiving in here. This is definitely a scent that I associate with Thanksgiving. There is a little bit of smokiness from the stock, but I don't think it's going to ruin anything. In fact, it might make things better. Now, I know you probably have your own Thanksgiving traditions, and Thanksgiving is not necessarily the time to try out new things that family members might revolt, alliances might be broken, enemies may be made permanently. So I can understand if you don't want to try this dish on your own Thanksgiving, but it is a tradition in my house, and hopefully you'll be able to get around and trying it on your own time. So there you have it. The stuffing is complete, and now it's time to taste it. It smells wonderful, and this smell reminds me of all these memories that I have of making this with my father, which is wonderful. And I know that I have some ingredients in here that might be a little fancier, might be a little hard to find. I think the main takeaway from this is to approach it the way that my father did and just use whatever you can find and whatever you have at your local supermarket or whatever is in your pantry, and put together something that reflects you and reflects your family and your traditions. So here we go. I'm going in. This is still very hot. I just pulled it from the oven. It's a lot of steam coming off. I don't want to burn my tongue. It smells great. All right, here goes. It's great. I love it. I already knew I was going to. The bread that we worked so hard to get dried out has absorbed all the moisture from the fruit, from the sausage, from the turkey stock, and it just coats the inside of your mouth with this wonderful flavor, this wonderful texture of the bread. The nuts in there and the fruit add a contrast and of both texture and flavor to the bread. You have little bits of sausage in there that give you these These just moments, these flashes of flavor and saltiness. It's great. It's a great, like, essentially it's a casserole. And it's great to like search through here and find little bits and little things to taste and try. And it's also fun to try to get little bits combined together on one forkful. But yeah, I hope that your Thanksgiving goes well this holiday season, and that even if you can't be with people due to health concerns, that you can still unite with them in other ways, maybe over the phone, and remember the importance of Thanksgiving. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time on Dr. Beck's Epicurean Delights. That was a good bite. That's fantastic.